June 4, 1943. Mexia, Texas. The train hissed to a stop. One by one, 1,800 German prisoners stepped onto the platform. They were veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps, men who had fought in the burning deserts of Tunisia, men who had once believed Germany could not be beaten. But nothing in their years of war prepared them for what they saw that night. Outside the windows, the town glowed. Electric light spilled from every street corner, every farmhouse, every store. Neon signs flickered. Shop windows shined bright. Even the smallest houses were lit up, as if the war did not exist. A young officer whispered to his comrade, almost afraid of his own words. "This cannot be America. It must be a trick." In his secret diary, one prisoner wrote, "No nation at war could live in such abundance. For 3 years we were told America was weak, broken, collapsing. Tonight, I see nothing but light." Back in Germany, since 1940, cities were forced into darkness under blackout orders. In Berlin, curtains smothered every window. In the countryside, only a fraction of farms even had electricity before the war. Germany had lived with scarcity. Here, in the middle of Texas, prisoners were confronted with the impossible, a land overflowing with power, light, and comfort. For many, it was the first crack in the wall of Nazi propaganda, and as their boots struck the wooden platform, silence hung in the air. No one dared say it aloud, but every man felt it. This was not the America they had been promised in Hitler's speeches. That night was only the beginning. Soon, trains, food, factories, and even the smallest luxuries would dismantle everything they thought they knew about the war, and about their own country. The journey to America began in defeat, May 13, 1943. Tunisia, the once proud Afrika Korps, was finished. General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, surrendered with 250,000 men, German and Italian alike. It was the largest mass capitulation since Stalingrad. Veterans who had pushed the British to the gates of Egypt, men praised even by Montgomery himself, now marched into captivity. Among them was Feldwebel Friedrich Radke, a holder of the Iron Cross, twice wounded in North Africa. In his diary, later found in the National Archives, he wrote simply, "I did not fear death. I feared what would come after surrender." For the prisoners, propaganda had painted a grim picture. They were told Americans were brutal, lawless, and vengeful. They expected chains, starvation, humiliation. Some whispered that they would be shipped to salt mines or thrown into hard labor until they collapsed. Instead, their first encounter with America's war machine came in the form of organization. At Oran, Algeria, tens of thousands of Germans were processed each day. U.S. Army clerks photographed them, issued identification cards, recorded medical histories. Doctors examined them, vaccinated them, treated wounds. And then, in fluent German, American officers explained their rights under the Geneva Convention. Radke noted, almost bitterly, "The Americans processed us with more order than we ever managed at our peak." But what stunned the men even more was the food. Obergefreiter Hans Müller of the 21st Panzer Division remembered it in a letter home 8 months later. "While waiting for ships in Oran, we ate better than we had in 6 months of desert war. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was a trick. We thought they wanted to impress us." Only later did we learn it was their normal ration. To men who had survived on thin soup and hard biscuits, the meals felt unreal. Pancakes with syrup, fresh eggs, milk, things long gone from German tables. The Americans didn't starve them. They fed them as if abundance was ordinary. It was only the beginning of a long education. Because soon, these men would board ships unlike anything they had ever seen, vessels built faster than they thought possible, carrying them not into misery, but into the very heart of a nation they had been taught to despise. And that voyage across the Atlantic would shatter their illusions even further. The next stage of their journey began on the docks of Oran. There, the Germans met the ships that would carry them across the Atlantic. They expected old freighters, rusty hulks, maybe even the same crowded boxcars they had used to move prisoners across Europe. What they saw instead were liberty ships. To most prisoners, they looked like ordinary cargo vessels. But to those with technical training, they were a revelation. Each was a monument to American speed and scale. The SS Robert E. Peary, one of the ships built in California, had been assembled in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. To a German engineer, that number sounded like science fiction. At the peak of production, American yards launched 3 of these ships every single day. By war's end, there would be 2,710 of them. Each ship contained 250,000 parts. Engines made in different states, shipped to assembly plants that barely existed 2 years earlier, then bolted together with astonishing precision. The Germans boarded in silence. Some shook their heads. Others muttered that it was all propaganda, that the ships were shoddy and would never last the voyage. But the voyage itself proved them wrong. Life on board was another lesson. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division kept careful notes in letters he sent home years later. What shocked him most was not the ship, but the food. Every day, the American crew threw away more than his entire company had eaten in a week during the final months in Africa. Half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of milk poured out because they had sat too long. Zimmermann wrote, "They did not do this to mock us. They did it because waste meant nothing." Their supply was endless. For men raised in a world of scarcity, where every crumb of bread was precious, the sight was staggering. Even the technology aboard seemed futuristic. Radar antennas spun atop the bridge. Equipment the Germans believed only their own navy possessed, perhaps shared with the British, was now mounted on a common cargo ship. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Steuben, a proud Prussian aristocrat, later confessed in his memoirs, "When I saw radar on a freighter, I knew then Germany had already lost the war." 2 weeks at sea became a classroom in American power. The prisoners learned that the ship carrying them was just one of thousands. They learned that engines, steel plates, and propellers came from factories scattered across more than 30 states. And they learned that while Germany struggled to build even a handful of U-boats each month, America was churning out a fleet that seemed without end. For men who believed in the Reich's invincibility, the Atlantic crossing was a quiet demolition of faith. And as the ships neared the American coast, one thought began to spread through the ranks of prisoners. If America could build like this, if they could waste food, metal, and fuel on such a scale, then perhaps the war was already decided. August 2nd, 1943, the Liberty ships crept into Norfolk, Virginia. For many German prisoners, this was the first time they had ever seen the American mainland. What unfolded before them shattered the last fragments of Nazi propaganda. The Norfolk naval base stretched out for miles, over 4,000 acres of docks, warehouses, cranes, and machine shops. It was the largest naval station on Earth, and it looked every bit the part. Prisoners pressed against the rails of the ship, whispering to each other in disbelief. In a single day, this one port handled more cargo than Hamburg could process in an entire week. Where German ports struggled with shortages, Norfolk operated like a machine, smooth, relentless, endless. Gerhard Weber, once a factory worker in the Ruhr, counted the ships with a stunned expression. He wrote later in his hidden diary, "I saw 47 cargo vessels in various stages of loading and unloading. Each crane moved with electric power, not coal smoke. Each machine did the work of a dozen men. There was no struggle, no exhaustion. Everything moved with ease, as if they had tapped into infinite energy. To men who had shoveled coal and hauled supplies by hand, the sight was devastating. America was not struggling under the weight of war. It was thriving in the middle of it. The march from the docks to the trains revealed even more. Along the route, the prisoners passed parking lots filled with automobiles, hundreds of them, all belonging to ordinary dock workers. In Germany, cars were a luxury of the elite. The Volkswagen, promised to the people since 1934, had been little more than propaganda, with fewer than 1,000 delivered. Most Germans walked, biked, or took trams. Only the wealthy or the party faithful owned cars. But here in America, even the men who unloaded cargo each day drove to work in their own automobiles. To the prisoners, it felt as though they had stepped into another world, one where prosperity was not the exception but the rule. And then came the final shock of Norfolk, the trains. They expected cattle cars, the infamous 40 and 8 wagons, 40 men or 8 horses, that had carried them across Europe. Instead, waiting at the station were gleaming Pullman coaches. The prisoners boarded in disbelief. Padded seats that folded into sleeping berths, dining cars with white tablecloths and silver cutlery, observation cars with wide glass windows offering panoramic views. Feldwebel Radke wrote in his diary, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners." The guards themselves seemed embarrassed by the comfort. One sergeant even apologized that the air conditioning was not working properly. Air conditioning, in August. We had believed such luxury existed only in Hitler's private train. The journey inland was about to begin. The trains pulled out of Norfolk, wheels clattering on steel rails, carrying thousands of German prisoners deep into the American interior. For many, the shock was only beginning. From the windows of their Pullman cars, the POWs pressed their faces to the glass. What they saw outside defied everything they had been taught. Every small town blazed with light. In Germany, blackout orders had smothered cities in darkness since 1940. Even before the war, many villages had only a single lamp on the main street. But here, in Virginia and North Carolina, even the tiniest communities glowed with electric signs, shop windows, and houses lit in every room. One prisoner wrote later, "We passed through dozens of towns that first night. Every one of them had more electricity than all of Hamburg." At first, many thought the guards were lying when they said every American town had electricity since the 1920s. But the evidence kept flashing past their windows, mile after mile, town after town. Yet in Roanoke, Virginia, the train stopped to take on water and coal. What the prisoners witnessed there was another revelation. American railway workers refueled and serviced the locomotive in just 30 minutes. A task that would have taken 2 hours in Germany. Automated coal loaders poured fuel. Electric pumps filled the water tanks. Mechanized lubrication systems oiled every moving part. The prisoners watched in silence. One German engineer calculated that the railway yard used more electricity in a single hour than his entire Berlin district consumed in a day. He wrote, "The waste was magnificent. They left lights burning in empty buildings. Fans ran in rooms where no one sat. It was the carelessness of infinite resource." But what stunned the men even more was the casual wealth of ordinary workers. Railroad men wore leather boots that would have cost a German laborer 2 months' wages. They smoked American cigarettes freely, tossing half-finished ones to the ground. They drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles and threw the empties into bins without a second thought. For Germans used to ration coupons and scarcity, these small acts carried a weight as great as any military parade. As the trains rolled into Tennessee and Kentucky, the view outside the windows shifted. Factories stretched along the horizon, each one larger than most German cities' entire industrial districts. The Alcoa aluminum plant near Knoxville consumed more power than the whole city of Munich. Near Louisville, the Rubbertown complex, 4 synthetic rubber plants built in just 18 months, produced more in a year than all of Germany combined. For the prisoners, the message was unmistakable. America's capacity was not only greater, it was limitless. One Luftwaffe pilot pressed his face to the window as the train passed Ford's Willow Run plant in Michigan. There, in a single sprawling factory, workers were assembling a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. He counted 17 bombers visible from the train tracks. 17 bombers at once. He wrote later, "We had been told American planes were inferior, hastily built, and would fall apart in combat. In that moment, I knew we had been lied to." For 3 days, the trains rolled westward, toward the prison camps of Texas and Oklahoma. And for 3 days, the German soldiers watched a land that contradicted everything they believed. Abundance, electricity, cars, trains, factories that never slept. Workers who lived better than German officers. By the time the prisoners reached their destination, many understood something their commanders would never admit. Germany could never defeat this. After 3 days rolling across America, the prisoners finally reached their destinations, sprawling prison camps in Texas, Oklahoma, and across the South. They stepped off the Pullman cars expecting barbed wire, hunger, and humiliation. What they found was something else entirely. The camps were not brutal labor colonies. They were orderly, clean, and, by German standards, shockingly comfortable. At Camp Crossville in Tennessee, prisoners slept in heated barracks with hot running water and electric lights. Flush toilets replaced the latrine pits of Europe. There were mess halls, libraries, and recreation fields. The Geneva Convention had required humane treatment. The Americans went far beyond that. But the deepest shock came from the food. In Germany, rations had been cut to bare bones. Civilians received a few ounces of sugar each month, if it was even available. Coffee was ersatz, made from roasted barley. Meat had disappeared years earlier. At the American camps, meals looked like banquets. Pancakes with syrup for breakfast, fresh vegetables, roast beef, chicken, and sugar, bowls of it, sat on every mess table free for the taking. Obergefreiter Hans Müller later told the Red Cross, "We expected to be starved as prisoners. Instead, we ate better than in our own army. It was confusing. It began our education." The camp exchanges, the PX stores, added to the astonishment. For the first time, German soldiers saw Coca-Cola. A bottle cost 5 cents, the same price American children paid with their allowance. Ice cream, candy bars, cigarettes, fruit, even beer were available to any prisoner with camp wages. Prisoners earned 80 cents a day for labor, later raised to $1. At PX prices, a day's wage could buy 16 bottles of Coke or 16 candy bars. In Germany, such things were luxuries only the wealthy or party insiders could obtain, if they existed at all. Coca-Cola became the symbol of America's abundance. Bottles appeared everywhere, in coolers, vending machines, gas stations, schools. Even German engineers admitted in amazement that it tasted exactly the same in Texas as in Virginia, a feat of quality control German industry had never matched. Ice cream carried even greater weight. Most prisoners had not tasted it since childhood, long before the war. Yet in American camps, ice cream was routine. On July 4, 1943, Camp Shelby in Mississippi served it to both guards and prisoners. POWs watched in awe as hand-cranked freezers produced gallons of frozen dessert. One prisoner wrote in disbelief, "They used ice, cream, and sugar, all things scarce in Germany, for something as trivial as a treat. For them, it was normal. For us, it was impossible." By 1944, many camps even had electric ice cream makers. Vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, butter, pecan. Choices greater than most German cities had seen even in peacetime. These foods did more than satisfy hunger. They broke propaganda. For years, Nazi leaders had preached that America was decadent and weak, collapsing under corruption and chaos. But to the men who drank Coke and licked ice cream cones under the Texas sun, America did not look weak. It looked limitless. And so, within the barbed wire of prison camps, a quiet revolution took place. Prisoners began to question everything they had been told. The Reich had demanded sacrifice, hunger, and obedience. America offered light, food, and comfort. even to its enemies. For many, that was the most powerful lesson of all. In captivity, they began to realize Germany was not fighting a decadent foe, it was fighting a nation of abundance. The barbed wire was still there, the guard towers still stood, but the German prisoners inside America's camps were no longer thinking only of escape or survival. They were thinking of home, and the comparison was devastating. At night, letters passed through the censors. Prisoners wrote to wives, mothers, and children still in Germany. Again and again, the theme was the same. We eat better here than you do. We sleep in warm barracks while you shiver in blackout cities. We drink Coca-Cola while you line up for turnips. For many prisoners, this contradiction cut deeper than defeat in battle. The Reich had promised them sacrifice for a glorious future. America offered comfort in the present, even to enemies. Some POWs had been raised in households steeped in Nazi ideology. Fathers were party leaders, mothers were teachers of the Hitler Youth. Yet even these men struggled to reconcile the image of decadent, collapsing America with the reality they experienced daily. One prisoner confessed years later, "The United States destroyed my belief in the Nazi vision without firing a shot. It was not speeches or leaflets, it was ice cream and electric light." The cracks appeared in conversations, around mess tables, during work details, in letters smuggled past censors. Some asked aloud what others only whispered. If America could afford to treat its enemies this way, what must it be like for its own citizens? If workers here drove to the docks in their own cars, what future did Germany truly offer its people? If one American factory could build a bomber every hour, how could the Reich ever hope to win? For the more educated prisoners, the conclusions came quickly. Chemists recognized advanced distillation columns in American rubber plants. Engineers marveled at power consumption figures beyond anything in Europe. Technicians admitted that America's radar, its logistics, and its production scale were generations ahead. One wrote, "We thought ourselves the vanguard of civilization, but the Americans were living in a different century. We were already the past." Not every prisoner admitted these thoughts. Some clung desperately to old beliefs, insisting that Germany still possessed secret weapons that would turn the tide. Others muttered that America's abundance made its people soft, unprepared for real hardship. But deep down, many knew the truth. What they had seen could not be unseen, and the longer they stayed, the more the cracks widened. By the end of 1943, the German camps were filled with men who no longer believed fully in the Reich. They might not have said it aloud. They might not have admitted it to their comrades. But their diaries, their letters, and their memories revealed it clearly years later. For thousands of German prisoners, captivity in America was not just imprisonment. It was an education that proved the war was already lost. The train journey rolled on, deeper into the American interior. If the small towns had been a shock, the factories that dotted the landscape were an earthquake. From the windows of their Pullman cars, the prisoners saw industry on a scale they could hardly imagine. First came Tennessee. Along the river near Knoxville, the Alcoa aluminum plant stretched for miles. Its electric furnaces consumed 175,000 kilowatts of power, more than the entire city of Munich. A Luftwaffe engineer scribbled in his notebook, stunned. "One plant here uses more energy than an entire German metropolis. If they can devote this much just to aluminum, their resources must be beyond measure." Further north, near Louisville, Kentucky, the train slowed as they passed the Rubbertown complex. 4 synthetic rubber plants, built from empty fields in just 18 months. In 1943, they were already producing 800,000 tons of rubber a year. Germany had invented the process of synthetic rubber. Yet even in its best year, the Reich managed only 120,000 tons. A German chemist, once employed by I.G. Farben, studied the skyline of distillation towers and catalytic crackers. He later recalled in an interview, "Each one of these plants was more advanced than anything we had built, and there were 4 of them in one place. They told us there were dozens across America. I knew then that Germany could never catch up. And then came the sight that silenced even the most defiant among them. Willow Run. The Ford Motor Company's bomber plant sprawled across the Michigan countryside. It was visible for miles, a single roof covering more than 3 million square feet. Inside, 42,000 workers assembled the B-24 Liberator bomber. At peak production, one aircraft rolled off the line every 63 minutes. To the Germans staring from their train windows, the view was unforgettable. 17 bombers stood in various stages of completion, wings spread, tails rising against the sky. One Luftwaffe pilot whispered to a comrade, "We were told these planes were inferior, hastily built, unfit for war, but I see now they will drown us in machines." The numbers told the truth: 1.5 million parts, 1,500 subcontractors, 9 months from blueprint to production line. Each statistic was a hammer blow against the illusions of Nazi superiority. And Willow Run was only one factory. There were others in Seattle, Los Angeles, and Buffalo, all of them running day and night. For the prisoners, the lesson was clear. Germany could fight bravely. Germany could build ingeniously. But Germany could not do this. Every furnace, every conveyor belt, every assembly line they saw confirmed the same reality. America was not merely strong. It was unstoppable, and in that realization, another piece of Nazi ideology crumbled into dust. The barbed wire was real. Guard towers stood at every corner. Yet for the German prisoners inside, life was nothing like what they had imagined. They had expected misery. Instead, they found routine and even comfort. Each camp was a small town unto itself. Rows of heated barracks, mess halls with long wooden tables, infirmaries staffed by American doctors. The lights stayed on at night, something unimaginable back home under blackout orders. Hot showers ran daily. Every barrack had electricity. For men raised in a Germany of shortages, this was a new world. Food remained a constant source of astonishment. Breakfast brought oatmeal, pancakes, or eggs. Lunch meant sandwiches, soups, or stews. Dinner often included meat, beef, chicken, or pork, along with potatoes and vegetables. The Red Cross monitored rations closely, but the Americans rarely needed prodding. They served more than the minimum. A German corporal admitted in a letter, "I eat more here as a prisoner than my family does in Hamburg." Beyond the mess hall, the camps offered something no German soldier expected: leisure. Prisoners played soccer and handball in open fields. They built makeshift theaters where plays and concerts were performed. Some camps had orchestras with violins, clarinets, even pianos provided by the YMCA. Others formed schools. University professors among the prisoners lectured on history, engineering, and languages. Thousands of men studied subjects they would never have touched back home. In some camps, Americans even supplied books in German, shipped in by the Red Cross. Prisoners devoured Goethe, Schiller, and American authors translated into their language. And then there were the small luxuries that carried enormous weight. Cigarettes sold at the PX, Coca-Cola in coolers, candy bars for a nickel. Prisoners earned camp wages for labor, and with those nickels they bought the same treats American soldiers enjoyed. To drink Coke on a hot Texas afternoon, to bite into a Hershey bar, to smoke a Lucky Strike, these were experiences that redefined their image of America. Perhaps the most striking change came from music. American guards often left radios playing near the barracks. Prisoners heard swing and jazz for the first time. Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, Count Basie. To men raised on marches and propaganda songs, the rhythm was intoxicating. Some despised it. Others couldn't resist tapping their feet. But all recognized it as something alien to the image of a decadent and weak America they had been taught. Of course, there were still hardships. Guards enforced discipline. Escape attempts were punished. Some prisoners clung bitterly to Nazi loyalty, organizing secret groups that threatened comrades who spoke too openly. But for many, daily life behind the wire became an awakening. They discovered that even as captives, they lived with more comfort and freedom than millions of ordinary citizens back in Germany. Years later, one former prisoner summarized it simply. "They did not defeat me with guns. They defeated me with white bread and Coca-Cola." Behind the barbed wire, the slow dismantling of Nazi faith continued, not through force, but through abundance. By late 1943, the illusions were gone. The prisoners had seen too much, too many lights burning at night, too many factories roaring at full capacity, too many meals richer than what their families received back home. The Reich's story no longer fit the facts. Letters tell the tale. In censored messages sent across the Atlantic, prisoners tried to describe their disbelief. "They feed us meat twice a day," wrote one. "Our guards apologize when the air conditioning breaks," wrote another. "The smallest towns shine brighter than Berlin." For families enduring hunger, bombings, and blackouts, the words were almost unbearable. Many letters never reached their destinations. German censors destroyed them, fearful of the morale collapse they might cause. But enough slipped through to reveal the truth. America's strength could not be hidden. Among the prisoners themselves, debates raged. Some still clung to Nazi pride. They insisted the Allies would fracture, that Germany's secret weapons would change the war, that American abundance meant softness. But the majority had seen too much. They knew better. Engineers whispered that Germany's synthetic rubber plants were hopelessly outdated. Luftwaffe veterans admitted that American bombers rolled off assembly lines faster than German fighters could be replaced. Ordinary soldiers compared their camp rations with the hunger their families endured, and the conclusion was inescapable. One prisoner, once a devoted Hitler Youth leader, later admitted in an interview, "It was not arguments that convinced me. It was experience. I saw that ordinary American workers had cars, radios, even refrigerators. In Germany, we sacrificed everything, and still we had nothing. The Reich had lied to us." The change was not always open. Fear of hardline comrades kept many silent. Some camps had Nazi groups who threatened violence against those who spoke against the regime. But in diaries, in whispers, in quiet conversations over meals, the truth spread. The war was lost, not because of cowardice, not because of betrayal, but because America's power was simply greater than anything Germany could match. As one officer wrote in 1944, "We saw the future with our own eyes, and it did not belong to us, it belonged to them." For thousands of prisoners, captivity had become revelation. Nazi illusions had shattered, not under fire, but under the glow of American abundance. Captivity in America was never meant to be easy, but for many German prisoners it became something unexpected, an education, not only in language or academics, but in values, in society, in what it meant to live in a nation built on abundance rather than fear. Work details were part of daily life. Prisoners picked crops in Texas fields, cut timber in Arkansas, and repaired roads in Oklahoma. But the work came with fair pay, 80 cents a day, later raised to a full $1. With camp money, POWs could buy cigarettes, candy, and soda at the PX. Many discovered that American guards treated them not with hatred, but with a strange kind of respect. They enforced discipline firmly, but without cruelty. Guards shared cigarettes. Some swapped stories. Others even taught English words. For men who expected whips and starvation, this treatment was bewildering. The YMCA and Red Cross supplied books, instruments, and sports equipment. Camps became schools. Former professors lectured on philosophy and science. Musicians formed orchestras and choirs. Some camps even published newspapers, printed by prisoners, censored but still full of essays, poems, and reports. What began as boredom soon turned into discovery. The most profound lessons came from comparison. Through the barbed wire, Prisoners saw ordinary Americans living with more comfort than most Germans had ever dreamed of. Dock workers driving cars, farmers owning tractors, women wearing silk stockings, children drinking milk every day. It was not propaganda, it was reality. The Reich had demanded endless sacrifice. Here, sacrifice seemed unnecessary. America fought a global war while still overflowing with abundance. Over time, the realization sank in. Germany's promise of a 1,000-year Reich had delivered only hunger, fear, and destruction. America's promise of democracy and industry, imperfect though it was, had delivered electricity in every farmhouse, food in every store, and cars in every driveway. One prisoner wrote in his journal, "The Americans win not because of their weapons alone, but because their workers, their families, even their children live better than our officers." By the time many prisoners were repatriated years later, they no longer returned as the same men who had marched proudly into North Africa. Some still hated their captors, some clung to broken ideology, but thousands returned with a new understanding. That strength came not from oppression and fear, but from opportunity and abundance. One German officer summarized it best in 1946. "We went to war believing America was weak. We returned home knowing America was strong beyond measure. It was not their bombs that defeated us." It was their way of life. In the prison camps of Texas and Oklahoma, the true lessons of captivity had been learned. The story of the German prisoners in America is not one of battles or weapons. It is the story of abundance. From the moment they stepped off the trains in Texas, everything they saw contradicted years of propaganda. Electric lights blazing in every farmhouse, passenger trains with air conditioning, Liberty ships built in days, factories that stretched for miles, pouring out aluminum, rubber, and bombers faster than Germany could destroy them. And then, in the prison camps themselves, hot showers, hot meals, ice cream, Coca-Cola, music, and books. Comforts that most German civilians had never known, even in peace. For the prisoners, this abundance was more than luxury. It was revelation. It told them that America's strength was not just military, it was cultural, economic, human. The Reich had built its power on fear, obedience, and sacrifice. America built its power on production, prosperity, and the promise that ordinary people could live better than kings of the past. One prisoner reflected years later, "We believed Germany was the future and America was the past. But in captivity, we discovered the truth. We were living in the past. America was the future." That was the silent victory, not just on the battlefields of Tunisia, Sicily, or Normandy, but in the minds of men who had once sworn loyalty to Hitler. Inside the barbed wire of Texas and Oklahoma, under the hum of electric lights and the fizz of Coca-Cola bottles, the illusion of Nazi superiority dissolved. The lesson was simple, but powerful. You cannot defeat a nation that produces more than you can destroy. You cannot intimidate a people who live better in wartime than your citizens do in peace. And you cannot sustain a lie once men see the truth with their own eyes. When the war finally ended, many of these prisoners carried those lessons back to Germany. Some became critics of the old regime. Others quietly told their families what they had seen. All of them bore witness to a fact that Hitler had refused to believe, that America's strength was not just in its weapons, but in its way of life. The war in Europe was decided by many battles, but for thousands of German prisoners, the true turning point came not with a gunshot, but with the glow of electric light on a Texas night,